Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight we are learning the Lefuah Shlema to Miriam Bat Ratzel, as well as Leilu Nishmat Rab Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Rab Avram. So we are going back to speak about the Kav Hayashar. It kind of worked out this way. That during the summer months, we speak about Pirkei Avos, we go through that series, and during the winter months, I like to try to go through the Kav Hayashar a little bit more on the Kabbalistic side of things. So now that we're past the I shouldn't really call it the season of Pirkei Avos, because it's always a season of learning everything. But I'd like to focus on for the next, foreseeable future on the Kav Hayashar and really delve into the topics that he brings out. Again, a lot of it is Kabbalistic ideas, and we use that as a platform, and then we branch off and we go to different subcategories based on whatever paraka or whatever chapter that we're doing. This particular paraka, we're up to the 9th chapter, is speaking what it appears to be speaking to leaders in the leaders of the Jewish people. And while a big chunk of it really does focus on that, we're going to learn lessons not only for the leaders, but rather for each and every single one of us, even though you could say, which is true and accurate, that every single one of us has some sort of leading capabilities, meaning that you lead in your work, you lead in your family, you lead in your, even in just a situation, you're able to lead into it. So we have a lot of different aspects that we use leadership qualities, but some people say, well, I'm not a leader. In that category, you are. You're leading in that particular thing. It could be like a scenario. It could be a situation. You're in the supermarket, something comes up, and then you're leading the situation. But I digress, because really the focus is what and how to understand the important character traits of a leader and how to act. And really this the lessons are not only timeless, but it's also to every situation. So the Kav Hayashar begins that why is it that the leaders of the Jewish people, they're called Nasiim? The literal word the word of Nasiim means like the elevated ones. But why do we use that vernacular? So the Kav Hayashar explained, because when a person is zochar, a person has the merit, he is leading with, or she's leading with Yiras Hashem, with the fear of heaven, then Nasi mala mala. Nasi is also another word that you go and you'll be raised higher and higher. And not only that, not only in this world, but also in the next world, your soul will be raised higher and higher, meaning that if you lead appropriately, you lead the way that you're supposed to, with Yiras Hashem, the right path that you're leading in, not only you get raised in this world, you also get raised in the next world. The Kav Hayashar continues, however, that what happens when somebody goes and does not lead in the correct manner, he does not act properly. So the same word Nasiim is from the word in Mishlei, from a pasuk in Mishlei, Nasiim beruach, which means in this pasuk, in this verse, it means clouds and wind. What happens to clouds and wind? The cloud dissipates eventually, and the wind passes by and never returns again. So what happens to a leader that doesn't lead properly, doesn't lead appropriately? It could either be, as the Kav Hayashar explained, either they fail to take on the community's burden, or they're leading with arrogance. Whatever it is that the reason is, what happens to them is not only do they not get raised in this world, they actually, the Kav Hayashar says they pass from this world abruptly, and their descendants are forgotten. Meaning they lose this world and et cetera, et cetera, ... So we see over here the ramifications are very big. Now, when you start and you open up a sefer and it speaks about a particular category, be like, okay, well, does what I do with me? I'm not a leader. What I have to do it. But we're going to see that no, there's leadership in each and every single one of us. When you break this down, you take a step back, and I would like to take the first two, call it categories of this pack, and I really want to delve into this, really, really dissect it. When you are asked what would be the main qualifications of a leader, it could be a leader in a business, it could be a leader in the house, it could be a leader in a synagogue, whatever it is, doesn't matter, a community. What would be the top qualifications? So some people would say intelligence, other people would say maybe charisma, other people would say power, maybe motivational. There's a lot of different words that can be used there. But let's look at the Torah. Let's look at the most famous leader in Jewish history, and that is none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. I'd like to take you on a little journey through Moshe Rabbeinu's life, just to get a little bit of an understanding of who the person was, right? When we think about Moshe Rabbeinu, the first thing that we think about is like, oh yeah, leader, prophet, spoke to God, went up to heaven, like completely a different world. That only happened the last quarter of his life. The first 2/3 of his life was very, very different. That Moshe Rabbeinu was born to the leaders of the Jewish nation, but he was born in the worst time to be born as a boy to the Jewish nation. And that was when Paro went and made a decree that all the Jewish boys should be thrown into the river, should be killed. And this is when Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Moshe Rabbeinu was born during this time. He was born prematurely, so his mother was able to hold him on for an extra 3 months. When the time came, because they kept very meticulous records, and they knew, oh, she's pregnant, when's the due date, and they went to check on to make sure that every baby was properly, disposed of. So when the time came that they would be checking on her because the baby was supposed to be due that time. She was already 3 months old. And Moshe Rabbeinu's mother, Yocheved, decided that she is going to go and put him in a basket in the Nile River, because that's going to be much, like at least they'll have some sort of chance of survival. What's going to be? It's going to be in God's hand. But this I'm going to, this at least I'll do something. So Moshe Rabbeinu's mother goes, takes him, puts him in a basket, and puts him in the Nile River. He's 3 months old. And we all know the story. Batya, the daughter of Paro, was sitting over there in the Nile River. She had saras, whatever. We're not going to get into all the details. And she went to bathe. It helped her. And she sees this basket floating. She goes and she stretches her hand. She takes the basket. She sees it's a baby boy. She says, oh, this boy is so cute, so wonderful. I want to have a child. And she's defying all odds of logic, of not thinking like, wait, you know what? She decides she's going to take this baby boy and raise her as her own. And this is how Moshe Rabbeinu grew up. He grew up knowing that he was Jewish, knowing that he came from prestigious lineage, but he, at the same point in time, he grew up in the most sophisticated house in the Paro's palace, had the best education, the highest class, like the top level. It's almost as if he had, a foot in both worlds, in the spiritual world, the Jewish world, and also the secular world, because he was living in Paro's palace. Now, living in Paro's palace means that he gets educated, like, in the thank you, the duality, and educated in the, in all the everything that's out there, the best of education, how to present himself, he was royalty. So this is how he's raised for 17 years. Then comes a time that he wants to go out and see. He knew that he was just want to go check out his brothers and sisters in the in Mitzrayim, and he goes and he sees that an Egyptian is hitting a Jewish person. Now, we're not going to get into the whole backstory, a very fascinating backstory. It's not the time for the Moshe story, but a very fascinating backstory on like who was hitting and what was going on. There was an interesting confrontation over here. But he saw this Egyptian was beating the Jewish person. So Moshe Rabbeinu looked left, Moshe Rabbeinu looked right, saw that no one was there. Again, there's a beautiful, fascinating interpretation as that as well regarding the descendant. Not one's going to come out. But in any case, he looks right, looks left, and he decides that he's going to use God's name. He had Kabbalistic knowledge on knowing how to say God's name, and that would be able to go and kill that person. And he killed this Egyptian, saving this Jewish this Jewish person. However, word got out, also fascinating, ends up being, who told Paro about him. Bottom line is, word got out that Moshe Rabbeinu was an Egyptian murderer, and he murdered one of Paro's, and Paro was furious. Now, it's very interesting if you stop for a second, but wait a minute. He was a dictator at that time. Paro never murdered anybody. He never killed anybody for no reason. Why is Paro getting all of a sudden, you killed him? Like, what's going on? This was his son, or grandson, if you want to call it. He was raised in Paro's palace, so he killed an Egyptian. Well, they did human sacrifice back then. Life mattered. It's very interesting when you start contemplating on the actual story. But what happened is that Paro got really, really upset, and he wanted to kill Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe, through a miraculous way of survival, he was able to escape Egypt. And he ended up, the Medrash says, in a land called Cush, which is nowadays known as Ethiopia. During this time, when he was running away to Ethiopia, there was, it was actually Bilam was on the scene, very interestingly, and there was a dispute, and it was more than a dispute. There was a huge feud between Bilam and the king, and Bilam tried to get rid of the king. And during this time, Bilam was able to overcome the kingdom to a certain extent. Bilam, whatever, and his crew. And this king at this point in time was fighting back to try to get his kingdom back. This is when Moshe Rabbeinu came into the scene. And Moshe Rabbeinu, assesses the situation. He decides that he's going to help the king get back the rightful place as ruler of Cush. And it took many, many years, but through ingenious ways and through Moshe Rabbeinu's help, the king was able to go and overtake his kingdom back and resume sitting on the throne. A short while later, this king died, and the people decided that they're going to crown Moshe Rabbeinu as their king. They saw how smart he was, how powerful he was, how sophisticated he was, how great he was. They decided they're going to make him the king, and he was the king of Cush for 40 years, a long, long time. He was a king for a long, long time. Again, they gave him his, the king's wife as a wife, but he never consummated the marriage because she was still serving idols. Again, details that are not important to what we're trying to bring out right now. But Moshe Rabbeinu became king, and he was a king for a very, very long time. Finally, the queen, which was technically his wife, but not his wife because he never consummated marriage, wanted her son to go and to resume to become the next king. He says, anyways, this guy's not really my husband, they go back and forth. And, the town people, the population didn't know what to do until Moshe Rabbeinu heard the commotion. He says, listen, if he wants to be king, no problem. He steps down. You just think about his life. No parents. Then he went to the palace. Then he went to, then he went to save somebody. And then he became a king. And now he's just stepping down for becoming a king. You look at the political, like just the mayor race of New York City, how nobody wants to step down. And you're talking about a king, completely a different level of power. And Moshe Rabbeinu steps down, and he leaves. And he ends up going to Midian, where he encounters Yisro's daughters. Yisro goes and takes him and throws him. Again, we're not going to all the details because that's not the topic for tonight. But he goes and he throws him into a dungeon, and he stays in the. Yisro forgets about him. And again, when he throws him into a dungeon, that doesn't mean that he has 3 meals a day. He has exercise, yard privileges, cable. He could take get maybe a degree. He got nothing. He's sitting in a hole for 10 years, but the mercy of Yisro's daughter that fed him, he was able to survive. But after 10 years, Yisro, his daughter, reminds him. He says, "Oh, what happened to that, Egyptian?" He says, "Oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. He's probably dead by now." So his daughter was like, "Well, maybe we should check." He goes and he checks and he sees that he's still alive. And they decide, he's like, "Wow, this guy's amazing." Whatever. Long story short, Yisro ends up giving his daughter as a wife to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Talk about like family politics. People make jokes about their mother-in-law, things like that, or the father-in-law. Nobody was in Moshe. You weren't thrown in prison by your future father-in-law for 10 years, even though some people think marriage is like prison, but whatever. It is neither here or there. The point is that Moshe Rabbeinu's life is a roller coaster. And he is like thrown into so many situations, and he's always coming up on top. And then after all this ordeal, after this whole story where his life, would you feel like, okay, this is the path that it's going, he became a shepherd, right? He married Yisro's daughter, he became a shepherd. Family went to his father-in-law's business, became a shepherd. And one day he's shepherding, if that's the right word to use. And there was a sheep that runs out, and he starts chasing, and he sees the sheep goes and drinks from the water. And he says, "You must have been very thirsty." He says, "I didn't realize I didn't give you enough to drink." He starts having compassion and empathy on this sheep. He says, "You ran because I didn't give you enough to drink." He picks him up and he carries him back. Now, all of a sudden, Hashem goes there and says, "Oh," the Medrash says, "because you had compassion and care for the sheep, you're going to also care for other people, and you're going to be the shepherd of my people, of the Jewish people." And that's when Moshe Rabbeinu got this is the last part of his resume that just checked it off. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, now you could be a leader of the Jewish people. Now, we have to stop for a second and ask, out of all the qualifications of leadership for Moshe Rabbeinu, the thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu picked on was that he had a compassion for a sheep. Like, if you think about it, if you go to Moshe, if I were to start this class and be like, okay, Moshe Rabbeinu, what would be the top qualifications that you think he deserved to be the leader of the Jewish people? we could start off as be like, listen, he had the yichus, he had the lineage, he came from the leaders of the Jewish nation. Or you could say maybe he was educated in the palace. He knew how to lead. He had all the knowledge. Or maybe he risked his life to save a Jew. He was very courageous. He was very brave. Or maybe you could say he was the king of Cush for 40 years. He has experience in leading. He knows how to lead. Or maybe you could say, you know what, he was in Midian, and after all that he went through, he still remained a good person. Like, you could go through so many different categories, and you're going to point out to like, oh yeah, he had compassion for a sheep. That's what's going to make him the leader. And this is a huge, huge lesson. You don't want a Kadosh Baruch who goes and he sees empathy, sees compassion, what Moshe Rabbeinu had for every single sheep, says this man is worthy of leading the Jewish people out of Egypt. He cares about other people. It's not about, the fact that he had a high intellect. It's not about the fact that he had so much experience. It's compassion. That's what it's all about. Like, we think that there's so many different things that we need to do to succeed. And sometimes when we think in a certain manner, we kind of step over what's the most important thing. And you see this people in the deathbeds all the time. You know, they focus on X, Y, and Z, and at their deathbed they say, I wish I focused on A, B, and C. Right, spirituality, children, family, things like that, as opposed to what they, focus on is, work or pleasures or whatever it is. So you look at the character trait, the important character trait of empathy and compassion, and how this was what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said. This is what's going to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. This is going to be the most famous leader in the entire Jewish history. And we look at it, and we look, to each of our own lives. We all have leadership capabilities, leadership responsibilities at one point or another. Be like, what should we focus on? It was very interesting. There was a psychologist by the name of Daniel Goleman. He received his PhD in Harvard. It used to be that it would mean something. He was also a journalist for the New York Times, which used to mean something. Well, yeah, the world became a very twisted and unfortunate situation, especially in the secular educational scene. But he had a PhD in psychology and from Harvard, and his focus was he wanted to study leadership. And he wanted to know, what is the greatest predictor of success? Like, what is the most important thing that you will be successful in your life? So, obviously, leadership and business and work-related things. So, for decades, the assumption has been that the single greatest predictor of how, if and how you're going to be successful is going to be if you have a high IQ. The smarter you are, the more successful that you're going to be. So he took the data and he studied it within companies, and he came to the conclusion that yes, IQ, having a high IQ, being very smart, is a very good predictor of what type of job you can get. For example, if you want to be an engineer, you need to have a high IQ. It's very complex. But however, a high IQ was a very poor predictor on if you would become a star performer within that role. Meaning, it doesn't mean that it means that you can get the job, but it doesn't mean that you'll be the best in that job. And he went and he analyzed data from hundreds of corporations and all the top performers. And he found that he had a whole selection of traits that he found across the board from these successful people that ended up becoming leaders and, in their respective industries. And one of the top things that he found was empathy. Again, he had a whole slew of things. It was, with confidence and adaptability, influence. We're not going to get into all the things. He grouped them all together, something called emotional intelligence. But one of the top things that he found was empathy. He found that leadership, if you want to succeed in life and business and work and leadership, whatever it is in your life, emotional intelligence is twice as important as your technical skills or your IQ. And let me just repeat that, because people don't, we tend to that emotional intelligence, meaning your influence, your empathy, the ability that you're able to adapt, like the emotional aspect of, of things is more than double the importance of how successful you're going to be. And we look in the Torah and we see the success stories where the trait was. Moshe Rabbeinu, his emotional intelligence, his empathy, his caring, his compassion is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose him. And when we look at it, we want to be successful, right? So we look at psychology, we look at, forget about that. Look at the Torah, look at that. When you want to be successful, have that empathy, have the compassion, have the emotional intelligence to be able to know what to say and how to say it. You look at Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik was also one of the most famous leaders in Jewish history. He became second in command in Egypt and ruled for 80 years. Made Egypt not only avoiding its destruction, but bringing it to the wealthiest country in the world at that time. And you look at Yosef's story. Yosef's story is a similar, like a roller coaster of story. Yaakov Avinu had 4 wives. The favorite wife, we could call it that, was Rachel. Rachel is who he wanted to marry. But Rachel didn't have any children for a long time. After everybody else had children, finally Rachel became pregnant and she had her first child, which was Yosef. Now, can you imagine when you have a father and a mother that they waited for the child for so long and finally they had a child? They showered him with love and he became very obvious, a favorite of Yaakov Avinu, of the father. And then few years go by, he is blossoming, he's growing, everything is going amazing. And then his mother becomes pregnant, about 7 or 8 years old. Unfortunately, she passes away during childbirth upon giving birth to Benjamin. And Yosef HaTzadik, who had a mother and a father, his father had 4 wives. So he was, his mother was one out of the 4. And his mother was only his mother. But now he lost his mother. He had a father that had 3 other wives at this point in time, and the situation wasn't anymore what it used to be. He didn't have his mother, the core of his foundation. And eventually he builds himself up. Yaakov Avinu builds him up as well, and he's having dreams, and things are going great. And he's 17 years old. He's having dreams. He's like positive stuff is coming on. Right? He gets a special coat. And what happens is that his father one day tells him, go check on your brothers. He goes, he checks on his brothers. The brothers look at him. He says, Baal Chalim is Magi. Here's the story. The dreamer is coming. They go and they sell him to Arab merchants. Now, Yosef HaTzadik, at this point in time, he thought that his father was in on it. Because look at history. Abraham Avinu got rid of Ishmael. Yitzchak got rid of Esau. Pushed him out. Now, Yaakov, I guess maybe he was the oddball out. Maybe he's pushing me out. So at this point in time, he's a 17-year-old boy who went through a very, very traumatic life, in general, lost his parents, orphan, his own brothers sold him out. He is at the lowest point possible, right? He's got nothing at this, at this point. He ends up being sold from one to another. He ends up getting up into Egypt. He ends up being taken in the house of Potiphar. Long story short, Potiphar's wife wanted to do something bad. Yosef did something good. But instead of getting rewarded, he was sent to prison. And he sat in prison for 12 years. You're talking about a guy that went through, again, the roller coaster, up and down, up and down, up and down. He's going good. He's got everything, is falling down. What was the key moment that Yosef HaTzadik got out of prison? What was the key moment, right? So we said that Moshe Rabbeinu was compassionate with the sheep. What was the key moment of Yosef HaTzadik? Yosef HaTzadik wakes up one day after 12 years in prison, and he sees his roommates. He had the baker, and he had, the winemaker, and he sees that they're gloomy. They're a little bit down. Now, if you just pause for a moment and just contemplate about that, they're sitting in prison for many years, and back then you can't, appeal or parole, or if you're in prison until the mood changes or whatever it is. You could be there for the rest of your life. You're not going to be in a good mood ever. Why would you, you're sitting over there. And again, there was no air conditioning. You're sitting in a hole in a wall. You're the worst scenario possible. You're sitting over there. So everybody's in a bad mood, right? Probably all the time. And you have Yosef HaTzadik, who's something's off with you guys. If you wake up and you had a weird dream. So how much are you? You're off a little bit, maybe, okay, maybe it's serious, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, but the nuance on how Yosef was able to see it, be wait a minute, you guys are not your usual self. What's going on? And he said, we had a dream. Meaning he was able to notice that small nuance of I slept, I had a dream, I didn't know what it was. And he's okay, something's different over here. Meaning not only are we sitting in prison, we're sitting in a dungeon, we're sitting in the lowest part, but there's something awful here that I could see it. Yosef Atzadik had such emotional intelligence that he was able to pinpoint when, like, his roommates in prison were like not up to par to their usual self. And we know he went over the gym. He went and he told them the interpretation. They got out, and because of that, Paro had a dream, and he got out. And then 80 years that he was the ruler of of Egypt. But what's the focus? The focus is look at the empathy, look at the compassion. He had the best excuse to be the worst person in the world, right? You ever had somebody just like a mean person, and then you finally you get them in a like in a situation where they are vulnerable, they open up to you, be like, what's going on? Like, why are you like you? Like, well, why are you so bad? Like, why are you? Obviously you don't say it that way, but if you would know my rabbi, my teacher, my parents, my sister, my brother, my dad, my friend, my bully, my dad, a long list. You take a scroll out and you take a long list of all the problems that everybody did for you. If anybody had that long list, was it not Yosef? Was it not Moshe Rabbeinu? Yet they had the ability to overcome it and focus on the compassion and empathy and be able to look at others, and that's what made them successful. And you look Avraham Avinu. I mean, the list goes on and on. We're not going to go through all this. It's getting later than I anticipated. But look at Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu was the father of the Jewish nation, right? All he wanted to do was chesed. That's all he wanted to do. The biggest story, the most famous story, is the chesed with him and the angels, right? The three people. At 3 days after his bris milah, he was sick. He wasn't up to it. It was so hot outside. Yet he was still running to go and do chesed for somebody else because all he cared about is other people. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you care about other people? I'm going to make you successful. I'm going to make you huge. I'm going to make you great. And you look at Sodom during the time of Avraham Avinu. This is the exact, the exact antithesis of Avraham Avinu, the exact opposite. Sodom, all their focus was, it's all about us. It's not about somebody else. In fact, in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says that if someone says, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, that's a quality, that's a trait of Sodom. That's a character trait of Sodom. That's not a positive thing. Sodom took the righteousness, the kindness, and perverted it and twisted it in a way that it seemed like, so what are they doing wrong? They put a rule. There's no guests. You're not allowed to give charity. You're not allowed to give guests. And they said, okay, you know why? Because if God made this person this way, they have to stay that way. Like any reason or excuse out of it. And what happens is, if let's say a poor person would come, they would tell the community, okay, give them money, write your name on the dollar bill, and when you give them the dollar bill, make sure that you have your signature, your name on it. And the rule is that if there's someone who's a guest in Sodom, you're not allowed to go and you're not allowed to sell them anything. So what happens is that this person would come to Sodom, raise some money, collecting charity. Then he goes to the store. No, says, I'm sorry, I don't know you. You can't buy over here. And he goes to another store. You're a guest over here, or we don't sell to guests. One after another until this person dies from hunger. Then everybody comes to the body, collects all their money back, and goes home. The Sodom, they perverted the whole aspect of kindness, of chesed, of doing something else. And Avraham Avinu was begging for that, begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu, maybe you could save Sodom, maybe you could find 10 people, and there was not even 10 people in Sodom. So what happens? No compassion, no empathy. That result is destruction. And this is what the Rambam says also in Hilchos Malachim, in the 2nd chapter, the laws of a Jewish king, that a person has to be, you have to be merciful and gracious to the small and to the large. Meaning the small and the large, the powerful, the weak, and in all area. Just to give you an understanding of how important this is and the far-reaching effects that it has when you have compassion, when you have empathy, when you have Yirah Shamayim, when you have fear of heaven, and how long-lasting it is. Rabbi Cheskel Landau, which is the author of the Noda B'Yehuda, he was a rabbi in the city of Prague. Besides being the genius, having an encyclopedic knowledge of the Torah, he had a heart of gold, and the compassion was ready to help every single human being. One night, he's coming home from shul, from the synagogue, and he sees a young non-Jewish boy sitting with ragged clothing, tears in the corner, sobbing, crying. So he goes over to this to this boy and says, young man, what's going on? What's wrong? And he sees next to this boy was an empty basket. And the boy opens up to the rabbi and he says, listen, his mother died last year and his father was a baker and he remarried his, which is now his stepmother. He says, his stepmother is a very cruel and wicked woman. He says, every morning she wakes me up at dawn and fills me up a basket full of rolls of bread, and I have to sell every single piece of bread. And if I fail to sell even one, she beats me, she whisks me, she makes me go to bed without food. And he goes and he says, I'm afraid to go home at this point in time. And the rabbi says, why? He looks at the basket and says, the basket's empty. You must have sold everything. And the boy says, yeah, I did sell everything. He says, but when I was on the way home, I put my hand in my pocket to make sure I had the money, and the money's gone. I can't find that. I don't know, maybe I lost it, maybe it was stolen. He says, how do I go home without any bread and without any money? He says, she's going to beat me till who knows what. So the rabbi goes over to this young boy. He says, why don't you come with me? So maybe I can help you out. Maybe we can work something out. So the boy, not knowing where else to go, walks with the rabbi. The rabbi brings him to his house, gives him some food. The boy was starving. And the boy gobbles it up and he says, thank you very much. And then the rabbi, after he finishes, feeding him, he takes out 30 gold coins and he says, take this and bring this to your parents. The boy's face lit up, smiling, saying, wow, thank you so much. And the boy left. Years passed. The rabbi forgot about the story. And it was the 7th day of Pesach, Passover, and everybody was asleep. The rabbi was sitting up and learning in his study. And all of a sudden, he hears a very soft knock on the door. It's like at the early hours of the morning, who's knocking over there? He goes over there and he sees this young Gentile man standing in front of there. And he says, can I help you? And he says, Rabbi, you don't recognize me. He says, but many, many years ago, he starts telling him the story about the bakery, and then I was a little boy, and the rabbi says, oh, yeah, of course, how's everything? And this young man says, Rabbi, he says, you saved me back then, and your kindness, your generosity really, really touched me, and I've always wanted to pay you back, but there was never a time that I could. He says, but the time is now that I decided that I'm going to pay you back. And he says, listen, Rabbi, the Jews of Prague are in grave, grave danger. So the rabbi says, what's going on? What happened? He says, last night, all the bakers in Prague met at my father's home, and they instigated a plan on the direction of my wicked stepmother, and they decided that they're going to put poison in all the bread that they sell to the Jews because it was Passover, and Jews were not allowed to bake, so they would end up buying according to whatever, obviously certain criteria, they ended up buying the bread from the non-Jewish bakeries, and they decided they're going to put poison in all the bread. Make sure that you don't buy anything. But I am begging of you, please do not make sure that no one finds out that it was I who told you this, because I'm putting my life at risk over here. So the rabbi said, thank you very much. I appreciate all your help. And they part ways. The next day, the rabbi's thinking, he says, how am I going to go make sure that I say that no one eats this poison, and make sure that and he's thinking, and all of a sudden he decides it was the 8th day of Pesach, and he calls and he sends out a message to the whole town. So back then in Prague, there was a Jewish quarter, so everybody lives pretty close to each other. He said, I'm closing all the synagogues in the entire district. Everybody has to go to the main synagogue. And I said, I want to speak. And everybody comes for the final day of Pesach to the main synagogue. And the rabbi, the chief rabbi of Prague, stands up and he says, listen, he goes and he tells everybody, he says, because of our situation, that we're so far removed from our Sinai, and because the Torah has becoming more and more forgotten, unfortunately, mistakes are made. And unfortunately, I have to confess, there was a mistake that was made. We miscalculated the days of Passover. Passover, really, what we're thinking today is the 8th day. Really, it's the 7th day, and there's another day of Passover. And he gives out this message to everybody, and everybody's like, "Wow, I can't believe it." They, thank God that they found out the mistake, because we would have eaten chametz on Pesach. Like everybody was very grateful and very happy that they were able to catch this mistake. Meanwhile, this gave the rabbi another day. He was able to go and deal with the police and go and explain the situation. And the long story short, they were able to go and test the bread, and they found out that it was poison, and they they rammed out all the bakers, and due punishment was met. However, the rabbi didn't tell the story to anybody. Only when he was about to pass away, he told his son, Rav Shmuel Landau, the author of Shivat Zion. He told his son, he says, I want to let you know. He says that it wasn't through my wisdom that I was able to save the Jews, and this was a famous story, but rather it was because of an act of kindness that I once did for a Gentile child, for a non-Jewish child, because the act of compassion, the act of kindness, we don't realize not only the ramifications that it has in this world, but the ramification that it has in the next world and in this world in the future. Who would have thought that something kind that he did 20 years prior would save the entire Jewish city of Prague, which is a very, very large city? The reward is really endless. And we look at what the Kav Hayashar is telling us. The Kav Hayashar said that your leader makes sure that you're acting with compassion, you're acting with mercy, you're acting with Yirah Shamayim, and not out of arrogance, not out of overburdening the township. There was a rabbi in Canada who once said over this story. He says in the early 1950s, there was a rabbi who wanted to build a shul. And the problem is that he was an Orthodox rabbi, and all they had was a shtibel, which is like a little place, a little shul. And everywhere else, the conservative, the reform, the reconstructed, they all had massive buildings. They had a lot of funding. And, it was a lot more enticing when people weren't sure about, where they're going to go and how they're going to, expand their religion. It was easy to be, very easily persuaded to go into the reform or the conservative movement. So he decided he wants to build a nice, big, beautiful building for an Orthodox shul. However, he didn't have any money, and he didn't have any ways of getting any money. So he decides, you know what, you got to do his effort. He decides he's going to try to get a bank loan. And he makes a calculation. How much does he need for land and per building? It was in the 1950s. He figured he needed $150,000. Now, $150,000 sounds like a small number to make a building nowadays. But, when you adjust for inflation, the number is astronomical. And let me just give you, there's a few different ways to adjust the numbers for inflation. So you can do something called a straight inflation adjustment, which is, it basically uses the consumer price index. So the idea is that you take the average price of goods and services that you needed, for something in 1950s, and you compare it to now. But because that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a real estate transaction. We're not going to go into that thing. There is also the income and buying power, which is based on how much money you made back then versus how much money you make now. I know there's a very interesting calculation. This is called economic weight context. But again, not something that we're dealing with right now. But rather, I want to go through the inflation aspect through the real estate adjustment. So, real estate adjustment, the way that you figure this out in the what is $150,000 in 1950s compared to what is $150,000 worth now is that you take the average home price in the 1950s, which was about $7,500, and you figure out how many average homes can $150,000, which he was borrowing in 1950, buy it during that time. And you take $150,000 divided by $7,500, you get about 20 homes. 20 homes that you're able to purchase with that. Then you go to nowadays, 2025. The average home in the U.S. is about $515,000. You times that by 20. Right, because that's the same calculation. And the purchasing power is a little bit over $10 million, meaning that what $150,000 could have done in 1950s, you need equivalent over $10 million nowadays. Now, the reason why I want to present it that way is that you have a guy walking into a bank and say, I want a $10 million loan. And the bank manager just says, cool. Okay, what's your business plan? No business plan. It's for a synagogue. Okay, who's your guarantor? Nope, no guarantor. Like, what are the chances of somebody signing off on such a? There's nothing for supporting this loan. So he didn't know what he's going to do. He figured, okay, fine, I'm going to go. I'm going to ask for a $10 million loan. I got to do what I got to do. He goes, and without any plan, without any backing, without any guarantor, he walks into the bank, and he meets with the owner over there, and he says, how can I help you? He goes, I need a loan. He says, how much is a loan? $150,000. It's $150,000. Oh, it's a pretty significant loan. What's it for? He says, I want to build a house of worship. He says, oh, interesting, a house of worship. Okay. He says, what religion? He says, Judaism. Now, he was hoping they would stop over there because the conservative, the reform back then had a lot of money, had a lot of power. But the owner, the bank manager over there continued. He says, what denomination? And he was like, Orthodox, under the bread, or, the Orthodox. He says, you said Orthodox? He's like, yeah, Orthodox. He says, you got yourself a deal. And the guy was like blown away. The rabbi says, well, I mean, yeah, I'll take it. You take the check and you ask the questions afterwards. And he like a very perturbed, he didn't expect it to have such a success. And the owner over there goes and says, let me explain to you why I jumped and I'm giving you the money. He says, growing up, He says this bank manager, his non-Jewish bank manager, said that his father passed away when he was very young, and his family didn't have any money. And there was a local general store in the neighborhood that sold everything. It had, food, kind of like a mini Walmart, if you will call it. You could buy food, you could buy clothing, you probably buy tires there also. You buy everything in one spot. And it was owned by an Orthodox Jewish man. And he went over to my mother when he heard that his mother passed away. He said his father passed away, whatever, to his mother. And he said, listen, he says, I know, you're in a tight situation. He says, when you need food, you come to the store. You want to pay me, you could pay me. You don't want to pay me, you don't have to pay me. He says, you need clothing, you come to my store. You want to pay me, you could pay me. You don't want to pay me, you don't have to pay. I don't want you to worry. All you know is you're taken care of. And this bank manager says, because of this man, he says, we survived. He says that was the only reason that we were able to survive. And he said, I lived in a place in Canada where it wasn't so many Jewish people. He says, for years, I always wanted to pay back. This is the reason that we were able to survive. I was able to go into, this profession. He says, I always wanted, but I couldn't pay back. You're the first person that I met that's an Orthodox Jewish person. And says, and that's why I want to give you this. I want to give you this law. The rabbi who was saying this story said, and the reason why this story is so important to me is because the reason why I am religious today is because of that synagogue. That synagogue is the reason why I am religious today. And the rabbi continued and says, not only am I religious today, he says, I have my own yeshiva and I had 300 students. And that's all because I had that synagogue. Meaning there was a man, I don't know, in the early 20s maybe, and he went and he saw a family that was struggling. And he went and he helped them. And he didn't know anything that would come out from it. But many years go by, and eventually this rabbi meets this young man, and he says, oh, I need a loan. He says, oh, Orthodox Judaism, for sure I'm going to give you the loan. After everything that you've done for me, I'm giving you the loan. And because of that, he made who knows how many people religious. And because of that, there was 300 boys that were learning Torah because of that. You think about the ramifications. We do things and we don't see the results right away. And it's very easy to get turned off and be like, okay, so what's the point of it? And I get it. I understand why people have that, because you get burnt out eventually. And, how many times can you do something and you keep on getting burnt out? And it's like, okay, there's no point of it. But there are times in life when you just have to have that faith that God is going to take care. You don't know the ramifications. You don't know when you're doing something and the ramifications that it's going to have, crazy, down the line. Like we have no idea on how powerful one good deed could do. And this ability comes from compassion and from empathy. And this is what the Kav Hayashar is telling us. That you read the words, if a person merits the and he leads with yiras Hashem, with fear of heaven, then he it goes higher and higher. Meaning that in life we need merits. You don't just get, you think about the privilege of, let's say, giving charity. So, I need the privilege of giving charity. The other person has the privilege of receiving my charity. But you look at, in the world at large, you have people that donated millions of dollars to a college. If you think about, let's say the Jews that gave money to Harvard, to Columbia, and after all the anti-Semitism that comes out, how much of kicking? It's like taking money. It's worse than burning money and flushing it down the toilet, the ashes. It's like you feeding your enemy with your money. You have to have merit. And there are many people that they donate to colleges and they donate to hospitals and they donate. Okay, you could say maybe good could come out. Yeah, granted, hospitals are definitely, but at the end of the day, you look at it, for example, people donated to hospitals, let's say in Israel. And what did Israel do? They went and they took the Yehia Sinwar, who was the orchestrator of October 7th, and they healed him in Israel, in the Israeli hospital. So you're like, okay, fine. Yeah, granted, you saved a bunch of people, but the ROI, your return on investment on giving charity, you have to have merit to put the charity in the right place. So how do you get and by the way, the merit is also with learning Torah. Right? There are some people that, unfortunately, they get sucked into learning Torah through conservative or reform or maybe a twisted, unfortunate situation in Orthodox, which is not really Orthodox. So, you have to have merits to be able to sit. And that's the beauty of it. You not say mala mala. You go higher and higher. In order to go higher and higher, you have to have that merit. And you look at it. there was a famous rabbi who would speak to, let's say, like 5 people, like a gadol dar, right? A huge rabbi. Spoke to 5 people, but the emphasis, the power that he gave in those 5 people were like tremendous. And somebody once asked him, says, Rabbi, says, you put your entire heart and soul into these lectures and speeches. The audience is very small. It says, how do you do it? And the rabbi responded, says, I see 5 people. Yeah, you see 5 people. I see 5,000 people. He says there are their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. They're all coming from this particular... Who knows if you give one class or you speak to one person and the ramification that could change from that person's life would have a domino effect or a butterfly effect, if you may, and change the entire world, and it all comes to into your merit. We tend to see our reality, be like, okay, and I'm using this just because it's very easy for me to relate, and maybe for for other people as well. You give a class, you post it up online, and let's say you give a class and there is 500,000 views on it. You're like, oh, that's crazy. That's amazing. You made a Torah class that you're able to spread so much joy. You think great of yourself. But it could be that 500,000 people could be religious, but like nothing came out of it. Meaning that nothing changed from that 500,000 people listen to it, but nothing really came out of it. Then you give another class, and there are 4 people that listen to it. And you think, okay, well, this was a wasted class, right? Just 4 people. But if one of that person ends up becoming, religious, going into yeshiva, now opening up a yeshiva and learning and decimating, like the domino effect is so great. And the problem is that in life, we see and we get burned out, and we're like, okay, what's the point of it, of it all? Because we see the small picture of things. We don't see the ramifications. And even if we see the big picture, we're like, oh, okay, after 5 years, then this class is able to get, 500,000 views. And you think, who says that means anything? It could be that the 3-4 views ended up going and going much further. And I'm just using this as an example. It could be anything. It could be tzedakah. It could be doing kindness. It could be dressing modestly. It could be, learning, keeping Shabbos, davening. Davening is a huge thing where sometimes you had people that are inspired and they daven and be like, oh, I see the results. And they'd be like, oh, wait, I'm praying and nothing's happening. And they just give up on it. And it's just looking at too small of a picture, and you don't know the ramifications. And this is really a part that you have to have faith, and you have to say, okay, listen, and we see this time and time again from all these stories where people are doing, something, and the ramifications, it could be 20, 30, 40 years later. But the important lesson that we take out is that you look at Moshe Rabbeinu, you look at Yosef HaTzadik, you look at Avraham Avinu, the compassion, the empathy, and they just kept on going, even when things looked like they wanted to give up, even when things didn't look good, even when things were just going the opposite direction, they kept on going. They just kept on going, and then finally they got to the point, that tipping point, where then their entire life just changed and pivoted. Then they became the leaders and the greatest people in the history of the world. And in addition to a lesson is that you have specifically leaders, but it could be anybody, where you come to a point where like you feel like it's beneath you to do certain things. It's beneath you, and granted, sometimes it is, but when we look at the compassion and we look at, there's nothing that's beneath any. You look at Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a king. He was a son of the leaders of the Jewish people. He lived in Paro's palace, and you could think, okay, a sheep ran. I'm going to go and pick up the sheep. You know who I am. I went through so much. The king of that, but it was not, it's not about something that's beneath you. It's not about, if it's something about compassion, if it's something about caring, if it's something about being a good leader, then you drop everything and you need to do it. Right now, granted, it's much easier said than done. And this is the Kav Hayashar. As we continue, we just started that. Okay, we're going to go through it very fast to try to get through the entire pair. The Kav Hayashar goes and continues that, unfortunately, that due to pride and arrogance, these leaders that are leading with pride and arrogance, they make life harder for everybody else, but easier for themselves. They take all the honor. They don't take their financial responsibility. They put the financial responsibility on the community. And who ends up suffering the most in these scenarios? The poor, the middle class. They're the ones that end up suffering the most. And therefore, the Kav Hayashar says that if someone's appointed to a position of leadership, and again, leadership could be in your household, it could be in your work, it could be in your friendship group, it could be in a situation, a scenario, you have to behave with mercy especially, said the Kav Hayashar, towards those that are broken, the poor, the destitute, because with them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could bring terrible decrees. And he brings the story of the Kav Hayashar from the Arizal. The Arizal was one time teaching Torah to his students in a field where the prophet Asher ben Beri was buried. And all of a sudden, the Arizal stopped the class. And he says, quickly, everybody, gather some money to give to charity. There's a righteous person by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Alterutz, who lives in the area, who is very poor. He's crying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of situation that he wasn't getting, whatever. He wasn't getting help. He didn't have anything. And there is a very, very bad decree that is coming. So everybody went and gathered all the money. And the Arizal took the donation, gave it to one of his students, Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen, and he says, go and bring it to Rabbi Yaakov. Rabbi Yitzchak runs over with the money. He arrives to Rabbi Yaakov's house, and he sees Rabbi Yaakov is sitting over there crying. And he says, what's going on? Why are you crying? And he said, he had a water barrel that was broken, and he didn't even have any money to fix or try to fix this water barrel. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, don't worry. He went and he takes out that money. He says, here's some money that we gathered and collected for you. Rabbi Yaakov was so happy. He started showering him with blessing. When Rabbi Yitzchak returned to the Arizal informed him the decree has been annulled. The decree was that there was going to be a swarm of locusts that was going to go and destroy the area of Tzfas. And as they're talking, there's a huge wind that's blowing, and there's a swarm of locusts that is coming, like proportions that you've never even seen before. And his students were very confused. Like, what's going on? I thought it was that. And the Arizal, before they even landed, the Arizal says, don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. The decree has already been annulled. And the entire swarm of locusts just continued flying until it went into the ocean, and then there they all dried. They all drowned. I'm sorry. The Kav Hayashar said this should be a warning. Mikan Azara Gedaila. This is be a great warning for the entire Jewish people that we have to attend carefully to the needs of the poor, to the broken, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes the broken, the poor people, and he lives with them. He lodges with them. His Shechina is dwelling. His presence is dwelling amongst them. And this says the Kav Hayashar, that whoever gives a coin, money, tzedakah, charity to a poor person, they have 6 blessings. But you appease them with words, you make them feel good, you make them feel happy, you get 11 blessing. Meaning that you get more by just talking to them and making them feel feel good. I remember a few weeks ago, there was a man that came over to me in shul, was collecting charity for, I think it was for a wedding for one of his children. And he wasn't sometimes you see a person, they're in a chatty mood. And so I saw that he was talking. So I sat there and I was listening to him, and I was probably speaking in Hebrew. I was responding in Hebrew. And, I didn't do anything crazy. It wasn't I wasn't blessing it. I was just answering some questions, asking it, we're just conversing. After maybe it was a 3-minute conversation, it wasn't long. He takes my hand, he starts shaking it. He becomes very emotional. He says, I just want to thank you. He says, you sat and you spoke to me. He says, nobody else was speaking to me. Now, it wasn't my intention to go, man. I was just talking to him. You have people that are sitting and collecting, and it's so difficult to do that. And they go over to people, and it's just sometimes and maybe you're not able to do it to everybody, but once in a while, just stop and just talk to the person, and I walked away. I'm I had no intention of I'm going to talk to this person and I'm going to try to make them feel. I was just conversing, regular conversation, and the guy was showering me with blessings. He says, "Thank you so much." He's like, "Oh, you're so nice." And by the way, after all that, I'm I wanted to give him just more money. You see you get to see the true essence of of the person. So when somebody goes and collects money, every once in a while, or if you could do it every time, that would be great. Go speak to the person, make them feel good. You'll be blessed with 11 blessings, even greater than the blessings for actually giving the charity. The Kav Hayashar goes on, and he says that when you look at the rich people in the cold, they're able to sit in their homes that's well built, it's heated. But what about the poor? The poor, their homes are filled with holes. They don't have even enough money to buy firewood. And when the rain drops in, it falls on their necks. And this poor person, this is how they live. They live in distress day in and day and night. And yet, says the Kav Hayashar, many of them, they accept their afflictions with love and happiness. They go and Shabbos and Yom Tov comes, they don't even have enough money. They can't even buy bread. but they give praise and thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Kav Hayashar goes on. It says sometimes you have the rich people that are able to go and marry off the daughter, sons and daughters, whoever they choose. But a poor person has nothing to give. So sometimes the daughter gets married to an ignoramus. And what happens? The father-in-law sees his father sees the daughter getting abused, getting, mistreated. And what could he say? What could he do? Unfortunately, this is, obviously talking about 200 years ago. But again, the scenario still repeats itself, today. And not only does she has the great suffering, but also her parents have the great, suffering. And it continues the Kav Hayashar that if a poor man accepts the property with love and affection, the fires of Gehenna have no dominion over him. It goes us from Gemara and Eruvin. They're not able to touch him. And therefore, says the Kav Hayashar, I admonish, I'm warning that whoever gives money to a poor person should do so and do not cause this poor person shame, because the poverty is already enough. There's enough suffering that this person going through. There was a wealthy person who had a tremendous amount of generosity, and he would always give out charity. But it came to a point where it's like, it's too much already. Like, how much? You ever get sometimes on these lists where you get these what is it called, spam calls or potential, whatever. It comes up in the phone like, oh, this is potentially going to be a scam or solicitation of something, and you're like, oh, for this wealthy person says, these people are nonstop. Besides, he's going to go to the Chafetz Chaim, and he's going to go and speak to the Chafetz Chaim, and he goes over to the Chafetz Chaim, and he was about to speak about a situation where it's, like he wants to give, but it comes to the point it's too much. And the Chafetz Chaim, as he was giving a class, and as this wealthy man walked in, what was the Chafetz Chaim saying? The Chafetz Chaim said, "Ach toiv v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai." My whole life, what should be chasing after me? Ach toiv v'chesed. The good, only good and kindness should pursue me. And the Chafetz Chaim explains. He says, there's no person that could live life in total tranquility without any headaches. Everyone is chased by something. It could be repaying creditors, raising with children, sickness, health. Everybody's dealt with something. But the fortunate one is where they have kindness, where they have people that are asking them for money, or people that are asking them to stay in their house, or people asking them to become guests, or whatever it is. Fortunate is someone who discharges his obligation by pursuing charitable causes. Meaning, explains the Chafetz Chaim, says that there are a certain amount of headaches that you have to, a person's going to have to go through. And you have the ability. How are you going to do it? You're going to stay in your bubble, and then God will have to send you those things up. Or you could put yourself out there. You could help other people. You could bring other people. You could have charity, guests in the house. Sometimes it's it's too much. You're able to give classes. You're able to speak to people. You're able to drive. There's so many things that, again, these are not comfortable situations. But you put yourself in that situation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, wait a minute. Now you got rid of it was difficult for you. So now you're not going to get the headaches in other areas. This is what the Chafetz Chaim was saying. He was quoting the pasuk of Achtai b'chesed yidefuni kol yemei chayai. Better that all the charitable causes chase after me, that I have to deal with other personal headaches. The businessman heard the Chafetz Chaim saying this. He didn't have to speak to the Chafetz Chaim. He got the message, and he returned home, and continued he actually doubled down on his charitable efforts. And this, says the Kav Hayashar, is whenever one offers hospitality, someone who goes and invites somebody into their house, a person has to do yikabel b'sever panim yafir, says the Kav Hayashar. You have to go and do so with a pleasant, make them feel at home, make them feel welcoming. The guest, Chazal tell us, is greater than greeting the Shekhinah. And the Kav Hayashar goes and takes us a little bit Kabbalistic. Says whoever gives bread to a poor person weakens the power of 480 destroying angels and the mother of the shade. Okay, we're not going to get into the details of that. It's not for this time, and you're not supposed to mention on her name. But basically, you get saved from a tremendous amount of suffering. And the Kav Hayashar ends off that. Let's return to our topic, that the leaders have to be careful that they do not impose excessive fear on the community or unnecessary fear on the community. They have to contribute their fear, and they have to not show any favoritism. And if they do these things, says the Kav Hayashar, then not only will they flourish, but they will yamim. They will go and they will have their children also living long life. Now, I want to take a point on this, and I would like to go and speak about something that's very, very short on this week's parsha, and that is Parshas Noah. When you think about it, because this literally goes and it answers a massive question. You're looking at the flood is coming, right? So the Mabel. Noah was screaming about this for a long time. People didn't believe him. People said, no, you know what? Not interested, not happening. And they thought he was bluffing. And then it started raining. And they're like, oh, this is more rain than usual. And then it continued raining. And then the water starts raising. It gets to their knees. When water gets to your knees and someone's been screaming for 120 years, hey, by the way, do repent. You shouldn't be like, okay, wait, maybe it was right. But yet no one repented. Then it got to the waist. And no one repented. It got to their necks. And no one repented. How did that work? They saw, Noah went and he said, listen, guys, God is going to send the flood. He's going to destroy. Do repentance. And we're like, I don't know. It's okay. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And the flood is happening and they don't do repentance. How does that work? So the Torah tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the generation of the flood, they did many, many bad things, unfortunately. But what sealed their fate? The land was filled with Hamas. Hamas is robbery, it's theft. What type of theft? There's three types of theft. There's something called a ganav, a gazlan, and a chamsan. A ganav is someone who steals secretly in the night. There is a gazlan, who's somebody who's armed robbery in your face. And then there's a chamsan. A chamsan is someone who steals but then pays you the money, kind of does it in like a kosher way, like a mafia. Like, yeah, make sure you buy this from me, but don't worry, I'm gonna pay you for it. In the time of before the flood, people stole, but it was less than a shavat pruta, meaning less than a penny. So like, I can't pay you back. Meaning you can't pay someone back less than a penny. But what happens is if you have 1,000 people stealing something less than a penny, it makes a tremendous damage to the person. So they kind of, sometimes people, they cheat the system and they think like, oh yeah, like I cheated the system and they're so happy and proud of themselves. Meanwhile, it ends in destruction. It ends in destruction. But what was the reason that caused them to like not see that they're doing that, but the world is going to get destroyed? And the answer is that it's pride. Pride is what caused them. Be like, I'm not doing anything wrong. So I took something from somebody. It was less than a shavat pruta. I obviously don't have to pay it back. The aspect of pride resulted in them not thinking that they're doing anything wrong, which resulted that even if they saw, and this is what Gemara tells us, that even the Rishayim in Gehenna, they're not doing tshuva, they're not repenting. How does a wicked person, because they don't think that they're wicked? It's such a twisted. We live in a scenario, a day and age. It was very twisted. You have like big businesses that unfortunately they don't pay the vendors. And it could be struggling Jewish businesses, and the business could be on a brink of like bankruptcy, and this other the person that they're providing the service to is not paying them, and they have the ability to pay them, but they have all the excuses. No, I don't have to pay them now. I pay them after 30 days. That's the rule. Everybody has their own definition of reality and what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's not. And it's the pride that prevents them from even looking and seeing the true reality. And this is so unfortunate. And it comes in every single day in our life when we do something wrong, but we're like, no, you know what? I'm really right. I'm not wrong. I'm really right. And then because all that pride does is that it prevents them from doing anything positive or ever turning to tshuva. This is what the Kav Hayashar is saying, that if someone leads a generation out of arrogance, out of pride, things like that, that could be so destructive and it can result in so many detrimental things that they end up losing this world and the next world and dot. Let's just leave it at that. So there's many lessons that we could take away, from today. But if you could take a few, it would be the aspect that we're after Rosh Hashanah, we're after Yom Kippur, we're beginning kind of like the dark period of not like emotionally, but like the sun is like people are a little bit gloomy. But take this time, have a little bit of extra compassion, have a little bit of extra mercy, have that little extra kindness in you. You want that leadership capability. Everybody wants to succeed in life. You want that. You need that emotional intelligence. You need to have that. And if you do that, and how do you do that? The Kav Hayashar tells us right at the beginning, you have to go with Yiras Shamayim. You have to go with fear of heaven. If you're always focusing on doing what's right, then guess what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to lead you to the right place, and then Yiska, you'll merit to go higher and higher. And the bracha that I could get to every single one of us is that we should have the ability to lead, also be led the right way, but more importantly, we have the ability to lead the right way through Yiras Shamayim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us, that we should have compassion, empathy, mercy, and kindness in every single one of us, every single opportunity that comes up. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should not only give us those opportunities, but we should be able to continue giving us the opportunity. The headaches should be the headaches that we're dealing with doing good, and not any chas v'shalom headaches with health, with children, with parents. Everything should just be amazing and good, and we should just be focused on helping others. Thank you all for joining. Until next time, may you have amazing week.